Angela Warren had a reputation that stretched beyond St. Clair County. People in 3 counties knew her as the woman who never walked away from a messy case. She wore her badge with quiet pride, not because it gave her power, but because it gave her access to the most overlooked corners of Missouri's foster system. That Tuesday in June, she left the county office with 2 folders tucked under her arm and a Styrofoam cup of black coffee. The folders were marked priority. One belonged to a 6-year-old girl placed temporarily on a goat farm with distant relatives. The second had no name on the tab, just a state code and the word confidential scrawled in red ink. Her supervisor noted her departure at 2:12 p.m. She was expected to check in by 5. No call came. By 6, the office line rang once, then silence. At 8:03 p.m., a passing jogger found Angela's government-issued sedan parked at the far end of Lockhart Road. The car was unlocked. The driver's seat was pushed back slightly. Her phone and wallet were still in the console. Only Angela was missing. The state trooper who responded that night had only been on the job for 2 years. He logged the scene as undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. Her badge was not in the car, but the spare tire compartment was untouched, and the fuel tank was 3/4 full. The initial assumption was a voluntary disappearance. Rumors moved quickly even in official corridors. Someone muttered that she had finally snapped. Others whispered about an unresolved custody case that had kept her up at night. Within 24 hours, her supervisor had filed a formal report suggesting burnout. The local paper printed a headline, "No one liked, but no one contested veteran caseworker goes missing amid turmoil." By the end of the week, Angela's name was quietly removed from the county's active roster. Her office was cleared and repurposed by Friday. The building janitor boxed up her personal items and left them behind the front desk. Her photo came off the hallway wall. Angela's sister Nicole arrived from Jefferson City 3 days later. She expected resistance from the department, but not the kind she encountered. The front desk clerk said there were no appointments available. The unit director claimed her access was restricted. The deputy on duty asked if she had any proof Angela intended to return. Nicole stood in the hallway with a folder full of birthday cards, her phone records, and 3 weeks' worth of Angela's daily planner notes. None of it mattered. She left the building with her fists clenched and her jaw locked, passing a hallway where a new hire was pinning up her own photo where Angela's had been. Outside, the sky cracked with thunder the way it often did in early Missouri summers. Rain came hard and fast. Nicole sat in her rental car for an hour before driving out of town. She stopped once at the edge of Lockhart Road and looked toward the trees that bordered the service path. Then she left. A week after Angela vanished, a patrol officer doing a routine drive through the east side of town noticed something strange at the edge of a soybean field. A juvenile bike purple with bent handlebars had been left near a ditch hidden partially by weeds. It was weathered but recent. He logged it, called it in, and tagged it for removal. No connection was made between the child who once rode that bike and the folder Angela had been carrying the day she disappeared. That folder was never recovered. The family Angela was scheduled to visit reported no appointment, no knock on their door, and no memory of her ever contacting them. They were cleared of suspicion. No follow-up was made. The case went cold within 9 days. When Angela's name came up in meetings, it was with a note of discomfort. Her personnel file was quietly flagged with the code VWD Voluntary Withdrawal. No internal review was ordered. No district attorney inquiry was filed. Her badge number was reassigned in 2004. Time, as it does in stories that are buried, moved forward. The desk where she once worked became the starting point for 3 different new hires. The parking spot that used to hold her white county sedan became the designated visitor space. Her voicemail was erased and replaced with a new extension. The family she tried to protect was relocated 2 months later under a new program name. Angela became a story no one wanted to finish. People nodded solemnly when her name came up, but their eyes moved away quickly. Nicole kept calling every month for a year, then every other month for 2 more. Her calls slowed to once every quarter after that. By 2007, the calls stopped altogether. What she did not know, what no one could have known at the time, was that Angela had never left St. Clair. Not willingly. Her trail had not disappeared. It had been quietly buried, deliberately misfiled, and sealed behind walls that looked like procedure. In 2019, 17 years later, everything changed. A man named Louis Denton, age 26, walked into the offices of the Columbia Independent Tribune with a name he could not forget. He had been 10 years old when he last saw Angela Warren. He remembered her not as a badge, not as a caseworker, but as the woman who gave him a granola bar and sat with him under a porch while he cried. He remembered her face, her voice, and the words she whispered as she stood to leave that day. Luis told the reporter that Angela had warned him not to trust the people who wore the wrong uniforms. He remembered her stepping off that porch, walking toward a white truck parked just beyond the gravel, and never returning. Luis said he thought she had been taken. He had kept that memory locked up for 17 years. That summer, he decided he was done keeping it. The reporter listened carefully, took notes, and began to make calls. That was how the box was discovered behind the police chief's furnace. That was how the case reopened. That was how the silence began to break. The county archive building sat 2 blocks from the courthouse. It was not a place many visited unless they needed birth records or marriage licenses. It smelled of dust and microfilm and the quiet shuffling of people who never spoke above a whisper. After Louis Denton's interview made local headlines, an investigator from the state's Office of Internal Review was assigned to look into Angela Warren's disappearance. Her name was Dana Ellison. She had spent 10 years working cold cases in Kansas City and had a reputation for not backing down when a file was thin or when it had been buried on purpose. Dana's first stop was the archive. She signed in under the fluorescent lights and asked for Angela's original field logs. The clerk blinked at her for a moment, then said nothing. 15 minutes later, he returned with a small file and a forced smile. The folder was thin, too thin. Inside were 2 weekly schedules and an unsigned case note. One entry was redacted with permanent marker. The rest was standard language. Dana knew what she was seeing. This was not an oversight. It was an edit. Someone had trimmed the paper trail. Dana requested access to the internal communications folder next. It took another 30 minutes and 2 calls to a regional supervisor before she was escorted to the second level, a locked floor with compact shelving and rolling file stacks. The assistant who guided her wore a badge clipped to her lanyard and walked quickly without looking back. When they reached the correct aisle, Donna scanned the folder numbers until she found the one marked Q2-2002. She slid the tray open and paused. The section where Angela's files should have been was empty, not misfiled, not misplaced, just gone. Dana asked to check the backup scans. The digital archive was stored in a narrow office with a single computer terminal and a login that required 2 forms of ID. The clerk entered her credentials and opened the Q2 records. The screen blinked twice, then loaded a system message that made Dana's shoulders tense. Archive corrupted. Files unrecoverable. She requested a technical audit. The clerk called over a systems tech who confirmed that the specific file batch containing Angela's reports had been flagged for deletion in late 2004 due to disk failure. The timing felt too neat. Dana stepped outside into the humid July air and stared down the block toward the county office where Angela had once worked. She pulled out her notebook and reviewed her own summary. Angela had left the office on June 11, 2002, with 2 folders. One was assigned, one was not. The last time-stamped location from her vehicle's GPS log placed her near the edge of Lockhart Road at 3:22 p.m. After that, nothing. But in her log, there was a note labeled Emergency Response Required at 341 Wells Ferry. That address had been blacked out on the official copy. Dana checked the local address database. The property listed as 341 Wells Ferry was not a home. It was a disused grain storage building on land formerly owned by a contractor who had filed for bankruptcy in 1998. The county had never updated the property listing. Dana scribbled the address down and drove there that same afternoon. The building sat behind a rusted gate and a field of thistle that had not been cut in years. The siding had peeled from sun exposure and the roof sagged slightly toward the east. Dana parked on the side of the road and approached on foot. The front door was boarded shut, but a side hatch hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and rotting insulation. Empty crates lined the walls, and mice had clearly made homes near the corners. But something about the place made her stop. In the far corner, a child's backpack rested against the wall. Faded blue with a missing zipper and a plastic cartoon keychain clipped to one strap. Dana crouched. There was no dust on the top of the backpack, no animal droppings. Someone had been here more recently than anyone admitted. She took photos, bagged the backpack, and returned to her vehicle. She radioed it in as abandoned property found on county grounds. When she drove back to the station, she kept the radio volume low and her eyes on the rearview mirror. Back at the regional office, she submitted the backpack for testing and cross-checked the emergency address entry against dispatch records. No dispatch had ever been sent to 341 Wells Ferry in 2002. No welfare check, no welfare call, and no flagged visits. But the street was on Angela's calendar, written in ballpoint pen, circled twice. Dana pulled up county maps from that year and found something curious. An old, hand-drawn zoning record showed a temporary residence had been permitted for foster care support in the lot adjacent to 341 Wells Ferry. It was never renewed. The name on the permit had been redacted in the scanned version. Dana filed a request for the physical copy. 3 hours later, the clerk returned with the form. The applicant had been a woman named Cheryl Maddox, listed as a state-approved emergency foster placement supervisor. But Cheryl Maddox had died in 2006. No one had questioned her history. No one had reviewed her file. Dana wrote her name on a new page. She would start there. That night, Dana returned to her motel and reviewed every document she'd collected so far. She laid them out in rows across the bed. Angela's name showed up in 2 places. Her badge number was visible in only 1. The rest had been carefully scrubbed. The redactions were too organized, too selective. A pattern emerged. Every entry that had been edited occurred after June 1, 2002. Every call Angela made from her work phone that month was routed through a secure internal line. That was not protocol for social workers. That was reserved for legal teams and upper-level case reviewers. She checked the log again. One call was made at 2:47 p.m. on the day she disappeared. It had no recipient ID, only a timestamp. The call lasted 6 minutes. That was the call she needed. The next morning, Dana drove back to the county center and requested surveillance logs from the South Lot cameras for June 11, 2002. The security team told her the footage no longer existed. She pressed. They relented. One reel from that week had been preserved due to a battery test. It was mislabeled and had never been digitized. Dana took it to the field lab. The tape was grainy. There was no sound. But at 2:10 p.m., Angela could be seen leaving through the west door, walking with purpose toward her car. She carried a coffee in one hand and 2 folders under her arm. As she opened the car door, a white pickup truck pulled into the background of the frame. The driver stayed in the vehicle. Angela did not appear to notice. She got in and drove away. Dana paused the tape. She enlarged the image. The pickup had a roof light and a partial license plate visible just long enough to catch 2 characters. She noted them down. Then she rewound the tape and watched it again. The diner off Highway 13 looked like it had not changed since the late 80s. The sign outside flickered at the edges and the linoleum booths were cracked from years of sun exposure. Dana sat at the far end sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, waiting for a face she had only seen in one photo. Louise Denton had agreed to meet her in person after 2 phone calls and a single condition. He wanted no recordings, no badge on the table, and no interruptions. When he arrived, he wore a faded baseball cap pulled low and a jacket zipped to the collar despite the summer heat. He slid into the booth slowly, his eyes scanning the room like muscle memory. Dana said nothing at first. She slid a folder across the table and waited. Louise opened it and stared at the image on top. It was Angela, seated at a picnic bench with a notepad looking down at a document. Luis touched the photo and then nodded. That was her, he said. That was the last time he ever saw her. Luis spoke with deliberate pauses. He had been 10 at the time, living in a foster home run by a couple known only as the Carters. They lived 2 miles outside of St. Clair, near a feed distribution site that massed most traffic in and out of their property. Angela had come once before, but the second time she arrived, something felt different. She carried 2 folders and wore a dark blue windbreaker. She told Luis she needed to ask him some questions. They sat outside while the Carters remained in the kitchen. She asked him about the night sounds about the van that sometimes came after dark and about the names of the men he never saw again. Luis remembered that she had brought him a granola bar. She told him that she was working on getting him moved, but she needed more time. When she left, she placed her hand on his shoulder and said to be careful who he trusted. Luis said she turned toward her car and paused when a white pickup rolled slowly past the front gate. She stiffened, then drove away. Dana pressed for details. What color was the truck? Did he see the driver? Luis closed his eyes. It was white older, with one headlight fogged over. The driver wore sunglasses and a white shirt. He had dark hair and a scar or birthmark near his neck. Luis never saw him again, but the truck came back that same week. He told Dana that 2 nights later he woke to voices outside his window. He heard the Carters arguing with someone. The next morning, Angela never came back. He asked the Carters once. They told him not to mention her again. After that, he was moved to another home. No one ever asked him about Angela. No social worker followed up. He assumed she had been reassigned. It was not until years later when he saw her name on a missing persons board that he realized something had gone wrong. He had lived with that guilt ever since. He looked at Dana across the table. "You think they got her?" he asked. Dana stared at the coffee and said they got something. Whether it was her or what she carried, she did not yet know. After Luis left, Dana remained seated for nearly an hour. She reviewed her notes. The Carters had not appeared in any of the approved home rosters from 2002, yet multiple placements had gone through their address. Their file was missing from the central foster network. Donna cross-referenced the tax records. The Carter property had been sold in 2005 to an LLC out of Kansas with no ownership trail before that. She ran a secondary search through old utility accounts and found a reference to a Cheryl Maddox as the emergency contact. The same name she had uncovered from the permit log. That name had appeared twice now, both connected to Angela's final assignments. Dana highlighted it in red. The next day, she visited the county clerk's office and requested any archived complaint forms submitted in 2002 by Angela Warren. The receptionist looked puzzled but agreed to check. After 20 minutes, she returned holding a worn manila envelope marked internal. Inside were 3 copies of complaint forms, all unsigned. One had been misfiled under building code infractions. Another was marked returned to sender. The last one carried a handwritten note that read, "File incomplete, needs verification." Dana scanned the documents. Each one mentioned the same issue: unauthorized care sites. No case numbers, no chain of custody, just site descriptions and locations. One of them matched the Carter residence. Dana took copies and made her next call. The address listed for Cheryl Maddox was a rural plot 10 miles east of Lebanon, Missouri. Dana drove out the following morning, her car kicking gravel across the quiet country roads. The property was gated but not locked. A small mailbox leaned to one side and the grass had not been cut in weeks. She parked near the edge and approached on foot. A porch light fixture dangled loose and the screen door flapped in the wind. When she knocked, there was no answer. She tried again. Nothing. She circled the back and found a garden overrun with weeds, but also a wind chime that tinkled faintly. That kind of detail stuck with her. It felt recent. She left her card wedged in the screen and drove back toward town. Halfway to the main road, her phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. She answered without speaking. A woman's voice came on the line low and ragged. "You were looking for Cheryl. This is her sister. She passed 5 years ago. I saw your card. What is this about?" Dana kept her voice steady. She said she was investigating the disappearance of a social worker named Angela Warren. There was silence. The woman exhaled. Then she said she remembered Angela. She came by once, a long time ago, asking about placement records. Cheryl had worked with a private network that handled overflow. That was the term they used. Overflow. Kids that the county could not place quickly. She paused. She said she remembered a man named Tierney. Big guy, law enforcement. He and Cheryl had an arrangement, something about untraceable handoffs. Dana wrote the name down. She asked if Cheryl ever mentioned what happened to Angela. The woman paused again. She said Cheryl was scared after that visit. She burned half her files. She said she had seen Angela's car on the news. Dana asked if she would be willing to speak further. The woman declined. She said she'd already said too much. Dana ended the call and sat motionless for a moment. She opened her notebook and wrote the name Tierney in block letters. It was the first time a connection had been made to someone still in the system. She ran the name through the regional law enforcement database. Captain Ronald Tierney retired in 2011, former head of the Juvenile Task Division previously based in St. Clair. No known allegations, no disciplinary action. Listed as mentor to several county investigators. She requested his personnel file. Then she requested Angela's full employment file, this time flagged through the Office of State Oversight. The call came the next morning. The director of the Oversight Board said someone had been in Angela's file 2 months after she vanished. The name on the access log was Tierney. The house sat on the north edge of Pine Hollow Drive, its siding stained from years of neglect and its gutters sagging under clumps of brown leaves. It had once belonged to former police chief Eldon Strick, a man whose name had appeared in 3 personnel reviews, none of which led to suspension. He had died of a heart attack in 2015. His property had remained in probate until recently when a distant cousin sold it through an estate liquidation agency. Dana heard about the sale through a clerk at the municipal building who casually mentioned that old records might have been left behind. The agency allowed Dana to walk the property provided she signed a waiver. She arrived with gloves, a flashlight, and a notebook. The basement stairs groaned beneath her weight. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and scorched wires. At the far corner of the concrete floor sat a furnace rusted at the hinges. Behind it, wedged between a pile of dented paint cans and a broken shovel, was a metal box the size of a toolbox. It was sealed with rusted latches. Dana crouched, pulled it free, and placed it on the floor. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing a faded interior lined with the newspaper scraps and old index cards. On top sat a thin lanyard badge, the plastic cracked but intact. The photo was unmistakable. Angela Warren, smiling slightly, her ID number still legible. Beneath the badge lay a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be a torn strip of cloth. It was reddish in color and stiff along the edges. Dana used forceps to lift it. There were signs of dried blood. No log number was listed on the tag, no initial or date. It was an unregistered item. She set it aside and examined the rest of the contents. There were 2 manila folders, one labeled Intake Closed 2001, the other marked Outreach Holds. Inside the second folder were printed case logs, each stamped with a state seal. Several pages had been circled in blue pen. Each circle marked the same term repeated multiple times: emergency transfer without license. Dana felt a cold pressure rise in her chest. At the bottom of the box, tucked beneath an old bank statement, was a single sheet of lined yellow paper folded twice. The handwriting was deliberate, slanted slightly right, and written in blue ink. It read as a note to self, or perhaps a draft of a letter never sent. It began with a sentence that made Dana pause. "This did not come through me. Do not log it. You did not see her." The rest was cryptic. It referred to a missed intake signature, a destroyed time card, and a verbal order issued by Tierney to redirect an inquiry. No names were listed, just dates and fragments of events that aligned with Angela's disappearance. Dana photographed the note, then slipped it into a protective sleeve. She closed the box, locked it into her evidence case, and ascended the basement stairs without looking back. That night, she sat in her motel room and stared at the lanyard badge until her vision blurred. The weight of what she had found felt larger than any one file. The next morning, Dana filed a chain of custody form with the state field office and entered the evidence into the state's oversight database. She submitted a request for lab testing on the cloth fragment and asked for immediate DNA verification. While waiting, she returned to the intake logs. One entry stood out. It was dated 2 days after Angela disappeared. The entry noted the sudden reassignment of 2 minors from an off-grid placement to a transitional group home in Rolla. No case file accompanied the transfer, no judge signature. The names of the children had been partially redacted, but Dana could see the initials. One of them matched a record in Angela's last logged visit. The home in Rolla had been flagged in 2004 for overcapacity. It had been closed in 2007 following a fire that destroyed half the records. Dana made a note and scheduled an interview with a former administrator who had since moved to Cape Girardeau. When she arrived at the retirement home, she was met by a nurse who led her to a common room. The administrator, a man in his late 70s named Robert Haynes, was seated near a window watching the birds. Dana introduced herself and showed him a photo of Angela. His face tensed. He looked away briefly, then said he remembered her. She had come by unannounced once, asking about a child he never saw on his ledger. He told her that the home was always full and that off-ledger transfers were not uncommon. Dana pressed. Robert hesitated, then leaned in slightly. He said there had been an arrangement back then. Some homes received undocumented minors for temporary holding. No files, no court orders, just a note and a phone number. He was told not to ask questions. He named the person who delivered the instructions, Captain Tierney. Dana thanked him, handed him her card, and left without speaking further. That evening, she reviewed the torn paper again. The note made reference to a location she had not seen before. The name was handwritten in capital letters, Clearbrook. A quick search showed it was a privately owned plot once used for police storage and training exercises. The site had been decommissioned in 2003 and sold to a family trust with limited access. Dana filed a request for temporary inspection rights and flagged it for quiet inquiry. The access was granted with no objection. She drove out at dawn the next day. The grounds were quiet, overgrown, and surrounded by a low chain-link fence. She parked her vehicle 100 yards out and walked the rest. The main building had been stripped of furniture, but the basement had a false wall behind a tool bench. Dana pried it open and found a narrow corridor leading to a small concrete room. Inside were rows of stacked file boxes, most empty, some containing fragments of documents. One box held an index card labeled Warren A.W. Inside was a single sheet. It listed a date, a time, and the words "delivery intercepted." No further details. The handwriting did not match any of the prior notes, but it was block style and unadorned. Dana photographed the entire room and returned with the card. She filed an updated report with the Oversight Board and requested an internal interview with Tierney. The response came back with a polite decline. Tierney had moved out of state and no longer responded to inquiries. Dana escalated the request to federal review. 2 days later, the lab called. The DNA from the blood on the cloth matched Angela's maternal lineage. The sample had degraded, but the result was strong enough to confirm connection. Dana updated the file. She then received a notification that Angela's case file had been accessed remotely by an unknown user. The access point traced back to a retired police login with Tierney's credentials. Dana called the Oversight Board immediately. By the time they returned her call, the server logs had been cleared. The county server logs had been wiped, but Dana had seen enough to know someone was still monitoring Angela's case. The access had occurred late at night, routed through an old police login that had not been active since 2012. The credentials belonged to Ronald Tierney. The Oversight Board confirmed he had retained limited administrative access even after his retirement, something that should have been deactivated. The system allowed it under grandfathered status due to his advisory role in the department's juvenile transfer programs. Dana filed an immediate breach report and placed a lock on the case folder. She flagged the entire file for restricted clearance and notified the Department of Justice Task Force liaison. The DOJ responded within hours. They assigned Dana a contact from the Regional Integrity Unit. His name was Agent Mark Renner, and he agreed to meet Dana in person 2 days later at a federal field office in Columbia. Dana printed out copies of every document she had collected so far, including the photographs of the note, the basement file room, and the blood-stained cloth. She included the matching DNA report in the top folder and sealed the entire package under chain of evidence tape before loading it into her car. Agent Renner was in his early 40s with a sharp tone and an even sharper memory. He asked no casual questions and wasted no time. He scanned the evidence folder and asked Dana to walk him through the timeline. She explained each connection starting with Angela's disappearance, the redacted logs, the unlisted placements, and finally the forged transfers that had no legal basis. When she reached the part about the Clearbrook property, he paused. That site, he said, had been mentioned once before in an unrelated inquiry involving law enforcement misuse of off-grid holding sites. The details had never been followed up. Dana showed him the handwritten card marked Warren A.W. He wrote down the access code on the bottom right corner and promised to run it through DOJ archives. Before she left, he handed her a flash drive. It contained a list of state-issued identification numbers tied to placement officers from 1999 to 2003. He asked her to scan them against any names she uncovered during the investigation. It was not a formal cross-check, he said, but it might point them to ghost identities used to mask illegal transfers. Back at her motel, Dana opened the file and began comparing entries. One number stood out almost immediately. It matched a temporary badge issued in July 2002, just weeks after Angela vanished. The name on the ID was Marissa Glenn, listed as a substitute intake officer in St. Clair. Dana ran the name through every employment record she could access. There was no record of any state training, no tax records, and no driver's license tied to the name. The only document available was the badge request form signed by Tierney. Dana printed it out and placed it next to the original employee manifest from that summer. Marissa Glenn's name did not appear anywhere else. Her badge number, however, had been scanned at the Juvenile Intake Center once on July 10th and once on July 18th. Both entries matched the dates of undocumented child transfers that Dana had already flagged. This was not a coincidence. Someone had used a false ID to approve unregistered placements. Dana circled the date and wrote the word breach beside it. The following day, Dana drove back to the intake center. The building looked newer than it had in the photographs from 2 decades ago, but the layout remained the same. She signed in at the front desk and requested to speak with the facility's long-term records clerk. A woman in her 60s named Marion Keene met her in the archive wing. Dana showed her the photo of the old badge and asked if she remembered anyone by the name Marissa Glenn. Marion looked at the photo for a long moment, then shook her head. She said the face looked familiar, but she never remembered anyone named Glenn working under intake. Dana asked if there was any footage from 2002. Marion laughed bitterly. That was before they even had full digital capacity. Everything was logged manually. Dana asked if she could view the visitor logs. Marion nodded and unlocked a metal cabinet with a ring of keys. She pulled out a series of black binders and pointed to the one labeled Summer 2002. Dana flipped through the entries slowly, 1 page at a time. She stopped on July 18th. There was a signature that caught her attention. It read, R.T. Glenn. The handwriting was uneven and the line for phone number had been left blank. The reason for visit was written as observation approval. Dana photographed the entry and placed a Post-it tab on the page. She asked Marion if this had ever been reviewed by an external agency. Marion shrugged. That summer, she said the building had been inspected twice. Once by local fire services and once by someone from Tierney's office. She did not remember any follow-up. Dana thanked her and returned to her motel. She uploaded the signature image and ran it through a handwriting comparison tool against the note she had found in the furnace box. The system marked it as a likely match. Dana leaned back in her chair and exhaled. The person who signed the name Marissa Glenn was the same person who had written instructions to conceal Angela's visit. That evening, Dana received a call from Agent Renner. He had scanned the code from the file card and traced it to a disused contract held by a law enforcement supply vendor in Kansas. The contract was used to purchase unbranded uniforms, ID laminates, and badge shells. The contact listed on the order was R.T. Glenn, the same alias. Renner confirmed that the vendor had been supplying law enforcement agencies across 4 states during that time. The name had appeared in one other case, an inquiry into falsified youth transportation logs in Oklahoma. That case had been closed without resolution. Dana wrote down everything. She now had evidence of a false identity used to approve transfers, purchase official materials, and sign off on child movement without legal oversight. And the handwriting matched notes linked to Angela's disappearance. She sent the photos' ID scans and binder images to Renner. He confirmed receipt and flagged them for DOJ internal review. Dana returned to the juvenile center the next morning. She asked to see the old storage unit used for supply deliveries during 2002. The staff allowed her entry to a locked shed behind the building. It was dusty and empty, but the corner still had a single rusted cabinet. Inside were old intake uniforms, some tagged with names, others blank. She found one marked with the initials MG. She lifted it, photographed it, and bagged it for testing. The staff claimed no knowledge of the uniform's origin. Dana added the entry to her evidence log and returned to town. That night, while organizing her files, she received a text from an unlisted number. It read simply, "You are chasing ghosts. Stop before you find the wrong one." She screenshotted, forwarded it to Renner, and powered her phone down. For the rest of the night, she kept her weapon close. The coordinates appeared in the margin of a photocopied intake record dated August 2002. Dana had found the document inside one of the duplicate folders Angela had submitted during her final weeks. The page had been marked as duplicate incomplete and shelved in the back of an off-site archive warehouse. No case file matched the attached intake ID. The record contained no names, only a location reference hand-drawn in blue ink. The coordinates led to a narrow parcel deep inside the Mark Twain National Forest. The property had been privately leased for decades under the name of a deceased deputy named Harold McClintock, whose service history tied loosely to the same county juvenile division where Angela had worked. Dana drove out the next morning following a winding gravel road until it became impassable. She parked, loaded her gear into a shoulder bag, and hiked the final half-mile on foot. Pines towered overhead, their shadows long and narrow, casting jagged patterns across the trail. Eventually, she saw it. A small wooden structure, barely more than a shed, sat in a clearing overgrown with brush. The roof had caved slightly, and a porch beam hung loose, but the door still stood. She approached carefully, one hand resting on her flashlight. The latch was rusted, but not locked. Inside, the air was dense and dry, filled with the smell of decaying paper and mold. A single window allowed thin light to slip through the dust. In the far corner stood a file cabinet scorched along the bottom edge as if it had survived a small fire. The drawers were warped, but not sealed. She pulled the top one open and found several folders blackened by soot but intact. One folder was labeled Special Transfers 02. Inside were multiple sheets, most too charred to read, but a few remained legible. One had Angela's name written across the top beside a stamp that read Denied. Another sheet listed unverified youth entries with the code OCE, a designation used during overflow emergencies. These entries had no intake officer listed. Dana took photos of each page and slid the most intact documents into her bag. She turned toward the back wall and noticed a warped wood panel protruding outward. She pried it gently and discovered a shallow space between the studs. Inside was a plastic bag sealed with duct tape. She opened it slowly and found what looked like photo prints wrapped in wax paper. The photos were faded but still visible. Most showed wooded terrain pickup trucks and what appeared to be a temporary fence made from metal gate panels. In one image, a woman stood beside a youth wearing a dark jacket. The woman was Angela. Her posture was stiff, her mouth mid-sentence, and her hand gesturing toward a clipboard. Dana turned over the photo and saw the date July 2, 2002. Another photo showed a man in a dark vest facing away from the camera holding a long clipboard and standing beside two individuals with black bars over their eyes. These were not mugshots. These were surveillance images. One final photo showed a narrow box marked evidence locker positioned inside what looked like a wooden outbuilding. Dana bagged all 3 photos and resealed the cabinet. She returned to the car by dusk, her boots coated in dust, her bag heavier than when she arrived. Back at the field lab, Dana spread the photos across the table. The analyst on duty confirmed that the fence shown in the background matched materials used by the Forest Service during impoundment operations. He noted that the panel shown in one corner was county property often used in livestock seizure staging. Donna asked if any other field sites had been flagged for investigation in 2002. He checked the records and found nothing reported. She uploaded the images to the DOJ secure server and logged the cabin location under her case file. She then contacted Agent Renner and asked for assistance in identifying the man in the vest. Renner returned her call 2 days later with a preliminary ID match. The man had worked as a part-time contractor under the department's juvenile relocation program during 2001 and 2002. His name was Ellis Varnum. No longer employed, no formal disciplinary record. His listed address had been inactive for 5 years. Dana requested a field visit. She located a forwarding address linked to a P.O. box in Sedalia. She traveled there the next morning and visited the attached mail depot. The clerk confirmed that Varnum had stopped picking up mail 2 months prior. Dana left a card and asked to be notified if he returned. As she exited the building, her phone buzzed. A restricted number flashed across the screen. She answered. A low voice asked if she was the one looking into the forest cabin. Dana replied yes. The voice said she needed to stop. The place had been cold for years and was never meant to be found. Dana asked who was calling. The voice replied with a single name. Relay Point. Then the call ended. That night, Dana pulled up archived maps and searched the term Relay Point. She found no current listings. She cross-referenced historical property plots and located a communications site decommissioned in 1999 called Relay Point 9. It had once supported state radio frequencies before the infrastructure changed. The tower had been left standing, and the structure beneath it leased out to county personnel for storage. She traced the lease to a blind trust linked to law enforcement record storage. She filed for emergency access through Federal Request Protocol. Approval came through by noon the next day. Dana packed her gear and drove 3 hours to the site. Relay Point 9 stood just beyond a gravel turnoff beside a line of retired utility poles. The tower still reached skyward, its metal arms streaked with rust and lightning scars. At its base sat a cinder block structure with a dented steel door. The lock had been drilled and replaced recently. Inside the room was dark, except for a faint stream of light from a rear vent. The walls were bare except for 2 metal hooks and a cracked table. Dust covered everything. Dana stepped inside and turned on her flashlight. Behind the cabinet, she saw something odd, a rectangular outline on the wall cleaner than the rest. She tapped it and felt a hollow echo. She pried it open and found a shallow cavity. Inside sat a small black case wrapped in canvas. She opened the case. Inside were several items: a scorched badge, a damaged USB drive, a folded note written in the same handwriting as the earlier message. The badge was Angela's. The note read one line. I tried to log it. They deleted the entry. The drive was labeled Relay Footage 0702. Dana bagged all items and called Agent Renner. He met her at the field office the next morning. Together, they ran the USB through a secure terminal. The video was grainy and dark, but a timestamp appeared on screen. July 2nd, 2002. The frame showed Angela standing beside a wooden door speaking into a handheld recorder. She looked nervous but composed. The audio was faint. She spoke of undocumented transfers and said she would submit the report regardless of what happened. The final frame showed her turning away, then static. Renner leaned back slowly. Dana stared at the screen. She had just watched the last known footage of Angela Warren. The recording played for only 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The screen shook slightly from poor stabilization, the camera fixed on Angela as she stood beside a wooden fence, the frame partially obstructed by tree branches. Her voice remained steady. She stated clearly that she had witnessed unauthorized juvenile relocations at a holding site off public record. She listed 3 sets of initials. She mentioned a file she had attempted to submit through internal dispatch but had received no confirmation. She said she had retained copies. Her final words were delivered quietly. "If this disappears, I need someone to know I did not." The footage ended in a flicker. No sound followed. Dana and Agent Renner reviewed it 3 times in silence. He asked about the initials. Dana had already cross-checked them. One set belonged to a youth who later appeared in a Georgia school district under an entirely different name. The other 2 were never logged in Missouri's system. She closed the laptop slowly and slid the USB back into its evidence bag. They had more than a breach now. They had a cover-up. Renner instructed her to prepare a formal submission packet for the DOJ's Internal Ethics Board. He would elevate the video through protected channels. Dana spent the rest of the day organizing every file photograph and scanned document. She included the original note recovered from the furnace, the forged badge application, the photos from the cabin, and the DNA report. She added the signature comparisons and the log entries showing false identities. When she finished, the file weighed 3 pounds and had 36 attachments. She hand-delivered the package to a regional federal intake office under secure clearance and logged the timestamp. Once the report entered federal review, she was instructed to stand down until further notice. She returned to her motel and waited. 2 days passed without contact. On the 3rd day, she received a call from the intake office. The voice on the other end informed her that the submission had triggered an archival sweep request. Several names listed in her file were already under closed investigation in an unrelated juvenile services inquiry. Dana asked which names. The agent declined to say. That night, as Dana packed her files into the motel desk drawer, a manila envelope slid beneath her door. She hesitated, then picked it up. Inside were 5 grainy photographs printed on old thermal paper. The top image showed Angela standing near the entrance to a trailer marked as Mobile Processing Unit 04. The second photo showed a man partially turned away from the lens holding a clipboard. The next 3 showed a van, a set of floodlights, and 2 youths standing against a metal wall with their hands behind their backs. Dana flipped over the top photo. The back read only 1 line. Taken by mistake. No return address, no signature. She scanned the photos and ran facial recognition on the man with the clipboard. The result came back inconclusive. The database flagged him as probable match to a former transport coordinator named Jeb McCaffrey, employed in Missouri until 2003. Dana pulled his personnel record. It was incomplete. His employment ended the same month Angela disappeared. She drove to the last listed address for McCaffrey, a property outside Branson. The house had been abandoned. The mailbox hung crooked. A neighbor said he had left years ago, destination unknown. Donna left a business card wedged under the front door and returned to her car. That evening, she stopped by a diner near the edge of town. As she paid for coffee, the waitress handed her a small black cassette. She said a man had left it for the woman asking about the mobile units. Dana took the cassette to her car. She kept a portable player in the trunk. She inserted the tape and pressed play. The audio was uneven, fluttering at the edges. A woman's voice came through, unmistakably Angela's. She spoke slowly. "I found the van again. It was parked near Mill Station. No plates, same kids, no logs. I filed it with Tierney. He said nothing. I am documenting this in case my other report disappears." The tape clicked, then static. Dana replayed the final portion and paused on the name. Mill Station. She searched the county records and found an unused depot listed under the same name, long since converted into an impound yard. The deed had changed hands 3 times between 1999 and 2005. In 2002, it was owned briefly by a shell corporation registered to a postal drop in Springfield. Dana drove there the next morning. The lot was fenced and padlocked. A sign read, "No access." She circled to the rear and found a gap in the fence. Inside the yard were 3 old trailers, one of which still bore faint lettering along its side. MPU 04. She approached slowly. The door was bolted shut, but the rear hatch had been tampered with. Dana used a crowbar from her vehicle to pry it open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with rust. A row of old restraints hung from metal loops along the interior. The bench seats were stained and cracked. On the floor beneath a loose panel she found a clipboard. The sheets were water-damaged, but one name remained visible. A handwritten log showed the initials AW under Observer column. She photographed every detail, bagged to the clipboard, and locked the hatch behind her. As she returned to her vehicle, a black SUV passed slowly along the outer road. It did not stop, but the driver's face was turned directly toward her. She noted the plate and filed a report. Back at the field office, Agent Renner met her in the parking lot. He had been contacted by DOJ oversight. Her submission had been received, reviewed, and placed under immediate protective classification. He said federal investigators were now looking at archived personnel files from Missouri's youth relocation programs spanning 7 counties. Dana asked about Tierney. Renner paused, then said Tierney had been interviewed once 5 years ago regarding procedural gaps. The interview was sealed. Dana said they needed it reopened. Renner nodded, but said it would take time. Until then, he advised caution. That evening, Dana returned to her motel. Her desk phone blinked with a voicemail. She pressed play. A man's voice came through distant and cracking. He said he had worked transport in 2002. He said he saw Angela once asking questions nobody liked. He did not give his name, but he gave a warning. Not all vans went to the intake center. Some made an extra stop. He named a location, Old Quincy Mill Road. Then the line went dead. Dana searched the road and found it on a historical map. It had been decommissioned in 1998 after a flood damaged the bridge. The route no longer appeared on current GPS systems. She printed the map and packed her flashlight. The next day, Dana drove to the edge of Old Quincy Mill Road and parked near the tree line. She followed the worn path by foot. The gravel had eroded into dirt. The bridge was gone, but the supports remained. Beyond the crossing, in a small clearing, she found tire tracks. Recent. Too clean to be from the early 2000s. She'd scanned the area and found a concrete pad half buried in earth. At its edge was a steel ring used for anchoring mobile units. She knelt and brushed away the soil. Carved into the cement were faint initials. A W. She stood slowly and looked around. Nothing moved. Only the wind cut through the trees. Dana turned back, phone in hand, recording everything. The initials carved into the concrete settled deep into Dana's mind long after she left Old Quincy Mill Road. She had photographed the scene from every angle, logged the GPS coordinates manually, and recorded soil conditions around the pad for forensic context. She had expected traces of old debris or tire marks that led nowhere, but what she had not expected was the clarity of the carving. The letters had been etched, deliberately not scratched in haste. That meant time. That meant intent. It confirmed what Dana already suspected. Angela had been brought to this location or had reached it on her own. Either way, she had left her mark. Dana filed an incident report and submitted the photos to Agent Renner, who confirmed they would bring in a forensic team to assess the depth and age of the cut. While she waited for their findings, Donna turned her focus to the remaining names listed in the file recovered from the forest cabin. 3 were aliases. 2 appeared in earlier records as supervisors. One name stood out, an intake clerk named Everett Cosgrove. The original employee records listed Everett as a junior coordinator for out-of-state intake transfers from 2000 to 2003. His name had appeared twice in the routing logs Donna had uncovered back at the storage yard. Both times, he had signed off on youth transfers that did not appear in any follow-up paperwork. She located a current address in western Missouri just outside Springfield where Everett was listed as employed in private logistics. Donna contacted him through formal channels, received no response, and then drove to the listed warehouse herself. She found him in the loading bay, clipboard in hand, startled by the mention of her name. He refused an interview at first. He said everything that had happened was long in the past. Donna handed him a photo of Angela's badge, recovered from Relay Point 9. He stared at it for a long time, then gestured toward the back office. Once inside, he locked the door and sat across from her. His voice dropped low. He said he remembered Angela very clearly. She had come to him with a transfer log she claimed had been forged. Everett said he had checked the file and found inconsistencies. Dates did not match, vehicle records were missing, and one child had no legal intake tag. He had promised to escalate the issue, but Tierney had intercepted the call. 2 days later, Angela vanished. Everett claimed he had tried to submit a concern through internal channels, but his report was returned unsigned. After that, he was reassigned to document storage and eventually left the department. Dana pressed him further. She asked if he knew who else had been involved. He hesitated, then said there was a man named Gerald Knox, a contract driver who handled off-books transport assignments. Knox had worked under a private company that dissolved after a state audit. Everett remembered Angela asking about him just days before she went missing. Dana took down the name, address, and the storage site where Knox had once kept his logs. Everett said he had heard rumors that the logs were never destroyed. Dana thanked him and left. She called Renner and gave him the name. He recognized it immediately. The following morning, Dana drove 3 hours west to the site of the old transport company. The lot had long since closed, but the property now served as a holding yard for impounded vehicles. The owner permitted Dana to search the rear warehouse where unclaimed items had been boxed and shelved. She spent 2 hours opening crates before she found what she was looking for. A ledger marked 2002 Transport Jobs initials GK stamped on the cover. Inside were handwritten notes, vehicle assignments, and delivery logs. One entry on July 3rd listed the initials AW with the destination code QMR, the same code she had seen on the carved concrete pad near Quincy Mill Road. There was no pickup address. No receiving officer listed. The line for youth ID numbers had been scratched out. Dana copied every page and sealed the original in an evidence pouch. As she left the building, a man stood at the fence edge watching her. He wore a gray cap and dark sunglasses. When Dana reached her vehicle, he turned and walked away without speaking. That night, Dana stayed in a small motel outside Jefferson City. As she reviewed the transport logs, she found another entry that made her pause. A list of fuel purchases showed Knox had refueled at a station 20 miles from Clearbrook 2 days after Angela's last confirmed appearance. The signature on the receipt matched the log initials. Dana contacted the station and requested archived surveillance. The owner said footage from that year had been lost during a building upgrade. Dana asked for transaction slips instead. He faxed them over. The receipt time matched the window between Angela's last radio ping and the first appearance of the forged badge under the alias Marissa Glenn. The trail circled back. Dana now had physical proof that Knox had been in the region after Angela vanished and that her initials had been linked to an undocumented delivery code. Renner met with her again the following morning. He confirmed that Gerald Knox had been interviewed once in 2004, but the inquiry was closed after he provided evidence of unrelated work that year. That alibi had never been cross-referenced against transport logs. Dana handed over the entire file. Renner said the DOJ would reopen the review and that Knox would be placed on an internal watch list. Before they parted, Renner told her that a confidential source had come forward from the original oversight office. The source claimed that an internal directive had instructed clerks to destroy any hard files that mentioned Angela Warren between June and August of 2002. Dana asked who signed the directive. The source had not seen the signature, only the delivery tag. The tag read R.T. Glenn. Dana returned to her room and pulled up every image of Angela's last official notes. In one margin, faintly outlined, she saw the words "not Glenn," real name used somewhere. She printed the image and highlighted the line. Then she made a decision. She requested access to Tierney's retirement record. The file was restricted but not sealed. It included service dates, command reviews, and administrative roles. One section listed early field assignments. In 1993, he had served under a short-term grant project that handled youth crisis routing across rural Missouri. His supervisor at the time was a woman named Merrill Glenn. Dana stared at the name. The surname matched the forged badge. She ran a search for family records. Tierney and Merrill Glenn had once shared a household address. She checked property records. They had been listed as co-owners until 1997. After that, Tierney had changed his legal residence. Dana wrote the connection down in bold ink. The alias used in Angela's forged badge traced back to someone Tierney had once lived with. The oversight board never caught it. The database never linked them. That evening, Dana received another call from an unlisted number. The voice on the line was male, tight with fear. He said he had worked in intake for only 6 months. He had been told to reroute files that carried the AW tag. He said he had seen a photo once of Angela being loaded into a van. He said it was sent to him by mistake. Dana asked who sent it. The man said it came through internal dispatch under a code he no longer remembered. Then he said something else. He said the van had been headed toward a place no longer on the maps. He said they called it the Dead Barn. Then the line went quiet. Dana wrote it down and folded the page slowly. Somewhere out there was the last place Angela had been seen, and someone still wanted it kept buried. The phrase, "the dead barn," circled in Dana's mind for days. She had written it in the margin of her notebook and highlighted it in red twice. The caller had not given coordinates or a real name, but his voice had carried a weight of memory. Dana knew that kind of fear. It lived in the lungs. She called Agent Renner and asked if he had ever heard the term in any prior interviews. He had not, but he promised to scan archived references through DOJ's internal routing network. The next day, he sent back a single hit. A 1996 report filed by an anonymous staffer in Butler County described an off-site processing location used for emergency youth assessment. The report used a nickname. It called the building the Red Barn. Dana cross-referenced agricultural zoning records and found only one such site that had been condemned before 2000. It had been located near Old Creighton Road, a property once owned by a now-defunct law enforcement training program. The final deed was transferred to a firewood company in 2003. She packed her gear and drove there the next morning. The entrance had long since eroded. The gate had no lock, just a rusted chain looped loosely over the post. Dana walked past it and followed the gravel until she saw the structure. The barn sat low to the ground longer than it was wide, with faded red paint clinging to warped wood. Vines had begun to reclaim the roof, but the windows remained intact. She approached slowly, noting the absence of tire tracks. No recent activity. The door creaked open without resistance. Inside, the light shifted, catching dust in motion. A faint chemical scent lingered beneath the mold. There were rows of old folding cots, overturned chairs, and one rusted file cabinet pressed against the rear wall. She crossed the room carefully and opened it. Most drawers were empty, but in the bottom she found a sealed envelope labeled AW Follow-Up. Inside was a logbook page, partially burned, and a torn piece of photo paper. The log entry listed the date July 4, 2002. It referenced an observer report flagged for deletion. The author's signature had been scratched out. Dana photographed everything and returned to her car. That night, she checked into a motel and reviewed the photo paper more closely. It showed part of a woman's shoulder, the edge of a lanyard, and a blurred reflection in a van's side mirror. She enhanced the image and found enough clarity to identify the jacket. It matched Angela's uniform. Dana wrote the location in block letters across her case folder. Old Creighton Road. Then she called Renner and submitted the latest findings. He told her that federal authorization had just cleared to formally reopen Angela Warren's case as suspicious death pending recovery. He said he had also been contacted by a federal prosecutor interested in reviewing Tierney's full-service history. The Internal Ethics Board had finally flagged him for secondary audit. Dana listened in silence. When he finished, she asked for one more favor. She wanted access to Knox's sealed statement from 2004. The transcript arrived the next day. It had been brief, only 8 pages. Knox had claimed he had driven nothing but standard transfer routes. He denied ever seeing Angela, but one paragraph stood out. He mentioned making a fuel stop near Creighton during the second week of July. He listed the wrong date. The fuel logs Dana had found placed him there 3 days earlier. She flagged the entry and sent the discrepancy back to Renner. The DOJ authorized a re-interview. Knox had moved to New Mexico but had never been removed from the inactive contact list. A team scheduled a quiet interview the following week. Dana was not allowed to attend, but Renner promised to debrief. While she waited, she compiled every page from Angela's intake assignments, matching initials, vehicle logs, timestamps, and final case visits. She traced Angela's last week hour by hour. The pattern revealed more than absence. It showed intent. She had visited 5 sites in 4 days, none listed on her official itinerary. Every one had since been connected to falsified placement logs. Renner called 3 days later. Knox had broken during the interview. He admitted to receiving verbal instructions to reroute Angela after she began asking about undocumented transports. He claimed he was told to pick her up under false pretense, bring her to a remote site, and wait for someone else to take over. He did not know what happened after that. Dana asked if he named the person who gave the order. Renner said he did. It was Tierney. The confession was recorded. Dana sat on the edge of the motel bed and wrote the name slowly across the final page of her notes. Tierney had orchestrated the reroute. He had used a former roommate's surname to file false identities. He had issued verbal orders to override placement systems. He had signed intake sheets that did not exist. Every connection circled back to him. The prosecutor scheduled a federal indictment review within 48 hours. Tierney was served at his home in Arkansas. Agents recovered old dispatch logs, correspondence files, and one fireproof safe from his basement containing hard drives marked personnel analysis. Inside were spreadsheets cross-referencing employee assignments, flagged reports, and what appeared to be a shadow record of youth flagged for reroute. Dana was flown to D.C. and met with the review team in a sealed session. She laid out the timeline, the photo evidence, the badges, the notes, and the carved initials at Quincy Mill Road. She explained the connection to Knox and to the name Glenn. She played the final recording from Angela's USB and ended with a photograph of the Red Barn. No one interrupted her. At the end, the room was quiet. Then the senior prosecutor nodded and said the words Dana had been waiting to hear. We move forward. The warrant was issued 3 days later. Tierney was arrested at a public event where he had been scheduled to speak on law enforcement ethics. He did not resist. His face remained blank as cuffs were secured. The press was not alerted. The arrest was classified under sealed proceedings until federal charges were finalized. Dana stood just beyond the barricade, her arms crossed, watching as the man who had orchestrated so many hidden decisions stepped into a government vehicle with his hands bound. That night, she met with Renner and reviewed the indictment outline. The charges included obstruction conspiracy, falsification of public records, and wrongful endangerment of federal youth under protected status. One count listed the name Angela Warren by full citation. Renner asked if she was ready for what came next. Dana nodded. She had been ready for 17 years. The morning of the federal hearing began with overcast skies and the kind of stillness that seemed to wrap around buildings like fog. Donna stood outside the courthouse with her binder tucked beneath her arm, her badge clipped inside her coat, and her name still not listed on any official press briefing. The hearing was closed to the public and sealed to external media. Only internal investigators, federal attorneys, a clerk of record, and the indicted were allowed into the chamber. Tierney entered the room with a neutral expression, flanked by 2 federal marshals wearing a pale blue shirt with the sleeves pressed flat. He said nothing as the charges were read, made no eye contact with anyone in the room, and kept his hands folded across the table in front of him. When asked if he understood the charges, he nodded. When asked if he wished to speak on his behalf, he declined. Dana watched him from the rear of the chamber. She listened to every count, every statute, every clause linked to documents she had recovered or signed herself. When the hearing concluded, Tierney was remanded without bail and scheduled for a full federal trial within 60 days. As the room emptied, Dana remained in her seat until the clerk approached her quietly with a sealed envelope. It had been submitted as part of the discovery process and marked with a code from the evidence list. It bore no return name, only a short message in handwriting she did not recognize. The note read this first alone. She waited until that evening to open it. She sat at her desk in a quiet office 3 floors above the street, the room dark, except for the yellow glow of the desk lamp. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of lined paper, slightly aged, creased 3 times across its center. The handwriting was familiar. Dana leaned forward and began to read. The letter had been written by Angela, not addressed to anyone by name, just written plainly as a record of her thoughts and her fears. She said she had seen too much and spoken too loudly. She said she knew what the risks were. She said she did not want to leave anything unfinished. She asked that if this letter were ever read by someone who cared, they should not let the silence continue. She said that silence was not neutral. It was not passive. It was chosen. She closed the letter with a single sentence that made Dana stop breathing for a moment. "If they find me gone, tell them I never stopped doing my job." 2 weeks later, a search team led by forensic recovery specialists returned to the Quincy Mill Road site. With new authorization, they excavated the soil beneath the cement slab where the initials had been carved. Within 6 hours, they found a canvas duffel wrapped in decaying tarp. Inside were human remains partially mummified and positioned carefully in a curled position. A pair of work shoes still laced and a metal badge case rusted but intact. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Angela Warren. The excavation was completed quietly with no public disclosure. Dana stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded, watching as the recovery team sealed the evidence bag. She did not cry. She did not speak. When the lead investigator nodded to confirm the find, Dana simply turned away and began walking back to her vehicle. The case was no longer just a theory. It had become a fact. The funeral took place in late spring beneath a sky that finally broke open with soft light. The service was private. No cameras, no speeches, just a small gathering of people who had never stopped asking what happened. Angela's brother Michael stood at the foot of the grave, his hand resting on the edge of the wooden coffin before it was lowered. He had not spoken much since her remains had been found. He had stayed away from the hearings. He had declined all interview requests. But on that morning he stood with a folded paper in his hand and said only a few words. He said she did not disappear. He said she was buried twice, once by those who silenced her and once by those who let it happen. Then he stepped back and let the earth be returned to her. Dana remained after everyone had left. She sat on the small bench at the edge of the plot and placed a laminated copy of Angela's letter beneath a smooth stone at the corner of the headstone. The wind rustled through the trees. It was quiet in a way that did not feel empty. In the months that followed, federal charges extended to 3 other individuals. 2 were former transport coordinators. 1 was a supervisor in a neighboring district. All 3 had used forged intake logs or assisted in rerouting minors without legal documentation. One of them admitted in court to having destroyed Angela's original report. Another admitted to having known she had never gone missing voluntarily. The trials were steady and deliberate. The sentences were not short. Tierney received life in federal custody without parole. His final appeal was denied. No confession ever came from him. He remained silent from the day of his arrest until his final transfer to a long-term facility. He was never placed near other inmates with former law enforcement backgrounds. He requested no visitors and received no mail. His name became a footnote in the official investigation summary filed by the Department of Justice under the heading of Ethical Misconduct and Systemic Corruption. Dana remained with the task force another 6 months before formally stepping down. She declined reassignment. She declined offers to speak publicly. She returned to a quieter life, one with fewer documents and fewer nights spent awake watching evidence play on a screen. She kept a single box in her home office containing copies of Angela's case. She opened it once a year, not to investigate, just to remember. She received a card from Michael every May, always handwritten, always signed with a simple thank you. She never replied, but she kept each card in the same drawer as the letter. In the year that followed, a policy reform package named after Angela Warren passed through state legislation. It mandated third-party verification for all juvenile transfers, created protections for whistleblowers within social services, and required digital backups of all intake records. The bill passed with quiet support and little debate. There was no ceremony, there was no ribbon cutting, but there was impact. A plaque was mounted in the entrance hall of the Missouri Department of Social Services building. It bore Angela's name and the dates of her service. Beneath it was engraved a sentence that had been taken from her final letter. Silence is not passive. It is chosen. Dana stood in front of the plaque once during a visit and read it aloud. Then she turned and walked away. In the end, Angela Warren was not remembered for how she vanished, but for how she refused to stay quiet. She was remembered for asking questions when others looked away, for recording what she saw even when no one believed her, for filing reports that no one wanted to read, and for refusing to let a uniform become a muzzle. She became a symbol not of victimhood, but of duty. She reminded those who remained in the system that the work did not end when it became dangerous. It ended when no one cared enough to notice. Dana carried that truth with her long after the case had closed, long after the headlines faded, long after the files had been boxed and sealed and archived. She carried it like a stone in her pocket, a weight that never left but never dragged her down. If this story moved you or made you think, take a moment to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives. Let us know in the comments what part of the plot stayed with you most and tell us where you are watching from. Your thoughts matter here.